This is willpower.
Here we are, Dr. Christine Smith, dear friend and a woman whom I met at a conference. Is one of the best gifts I got during that conference in Colorado. And I'm so happy to have you on the Willpower podcast today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I always love chatting with you.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive in. There's so much. I was just speaking to you about this off recording about how the intersection of the way that you work with people, this sort of cross section of functional medicine and chiropractic care and cognitive neuroscience, and the ways that even I had a beautiful opportunity to come and be on your table and do some cognitive work that was really helpful to me. And I wanted to make sure I shared with the audience all the ways that this work you do is so pivotal in changing people's health and well-being and really having the conversation around where this intersection happens. So do you want to talk a little bit about how the disciplines kind of complement each other? Because I think for all of you who are listening right now, there's a lot of conversation on this podcast around pills and powders and techniques. And we have talked about the quantum field, and we've talked about belief structure a bit, but mostly we talk a lot about these like tactical, practical, working out, taking your supplements, what's working for skincare, what's working for a specific, let's say, lane of the body. But then there's this whole other landscape that continues to hopefully be gaining momentum in the world, which is really like how we feel about ourselves, what we're thinking, and what things we're programmed with that just affect our lives and our well-being. And you have seen this time and time again. So I'd love for you to talk about the disciplines and the intersection.
Absolutely. It is not separate. Nothing in the body is separate. I think that's one of the things people forget about is this beautiful, interconnected, intertwined, synergetic system, much like a thriving city. And when one piece is not functioning well, it affects the rest of the city. And so I think the best example of this is actually kind of what we were talking about before we hopped on to chat. And that's the idea of what do you do when your body doesn't tolerate supplements or exercise? Like, what do you do when you're in that state? And I was just sharing with you, because I know we've talked about cold plunge a lot. Like, there was a time where I was dealing with mold poisoning and my body was just really dysregulated and super depleted. And I was like allergic to my own adrenaline. So I did not tolerate cold plunge well. I'd get out and I'd have a rash and then I'd completely tank for the rest of the day. And then I also was a functional medicine practitioner who had become allergic to my own supplements. I couldn't even take B vitamins. It would like literally make my body break out in a rash. And I had this huge visual representation from my skin of what was going on in my body. And I got to the point where I was just so desperate with all of this training under me and none of it was working and nothing any of my mentors said was working. I was going to all the smartest people I knew and it was so frustrating. And I finally was just like at a loss and I asked my body and I just went inside and I was like, what do you need? Like, I don't know what to do. And it was like, I need you to sit here and drink water and eat these 3 foods and meditate and do nothing else. And I was like, okay. And so then I just broke down and started meditating, and I ended up going to a Joe Dispenza conference, and it was even his like progressive workshop. It was the first one I'd been to. And in 48 hours from meditation alone, my rash started to go down, and it was this visual representation like going away. And then afterwards I had a stressor and it came back, and then I meditated again and it went away. And I was like, well, clearly there's something to this, and it is regulating my immune system. And it turned into kind of some deep internal work of realizing that the energy that I was putting out was a lot of stress and worry. And I was perceiving my surroundings as threatening. So therefore my immune system was perceiving its surroundings as threatening. And everything was just kind of amped up. And when you're dealing with an exposure like that or something, it messes with your brain chemistry because of the inflammation. So it makes you a little bit more paranoid anyway. And then the paranoia makes the chemistry worse and you get caught in this horrible cycle. And that brain power, that worry, that stress, cortisol, adrenaline, all those hormones, it actually grows bad bacteria in your gut. A lot of people don't know that. You grow bad bacteria in your gut when you're stressed out. So when you're stressed chronically, you actually get dysbiosis in your gut, and it messes with your neurotransmitters and it messes with your hormones and all of this stuff. So when people come into the office, if they come in and after a while, you can kind of tell when someone's dissociated. They're usually quite calm and they're usually fairly put together. But when they talk about stuff, they just have like zero emotional reaction to it whatsoever. And if someone comes in that state and they're telling me about the, medical trauma from the last 5 years of their life and they have a completely straight face and no reaction, I know that we need to do body work to get their nervous system out of that dissociated state so that their cells can relax enough to absorb nutrients and to release toxins. So if people come in that state, I will start with body work, which I think has been lost in healthcare for a good amount of it. We forget the power of body work, and just having another human through touch start to help regulate your system. Like, touch is so powerful that if the animal mother doesn't lick their young all over their body, wherever they don't lick, those organs won't work as well. That's how powerful touch is. So when we can touch the body and we can help the nervous system get into a calm or regulated state, everything else opens up, and we can do nutrition better, and we can work with emotions more effectively. Like, I don't even dive into working with emotions right away if someone's in that dysregulated state, because they can't really process them because they're in fight or flight. So instead, I will do body work to essentially bring their body into a meditative state. And then once we get the brainstem regulated, then we can do the emotional work. Then we can do the nutrition and all of that. So that's kind of a view of how it's all intertwined. And my background being in cognitive neuroscience, it's the study between how the brain and the body affect each other. And it's a two-way street. And there's tons of signals going from your gut up to your brain. So if you get that dysregulated gut, it's going to affect your brain. And obviously, your brain sends signals to everything else. So it's this beautiful intertwined system that all affects one another and is most affected by what we call allostatic load. And it's the cumulative stress load on the body. So if you're going through an emotional stressor, say you lose your job, or you lose your home, or you lose a loved one, or you are having a falling out with a friend or something like that, your body's not going to have the same physical capacity to manage, say, an injury or like a car accident or lifting something heavy at the gym as you would if you don't have that emotional stressor. Or if you just got in a car accident, you're going to be a lot less emotionally resilient. And if you get exposed to a chemical exposure at that same time, it's going to affect your body more because you don't have the resources. So allostatic load is, what is the overall capacity that we're dealing with, and what is the capacity of the resources of our body to handle it. And that's how it's all intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's what's so special about the work that you do specifically and the courses that you have is that it is this convergence of these different pathways in the body, right? And that includes, our spirit, our belief, our cognitive nature, our hormones, all of that. And so that's what I think really brings the wisdom to the table, is that you can, I can't imagine going into a traditional GP with a white lab coat who's giving me 15 minutes of their time and they're like, hey, lay down on the table, let's have a conversation and let me work on you, or let's just be in stillness, so that we can kind of connect and move things through you. And that more and more in my life specifically even has become more powerful, like working with a somatic therapist, having, me help my nervous system process through, even with all the tools that I have, because I'm a woman on the go all the time. That reminder to be in stillness, that reminder to be in connection, that reminder to be soft with my nervous system and help regulate it is so ever present. Like I love my body likes to play in hypervigilance. It feels real safe there because of my upbringing and past and all of that. And so just like seeing that part of me and saying, okay, thank you. I see you running around and racing all the time.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things about how you just said it, right? You're like, I like being in this state because it's familiar to me. We can actually get addicted to our thoughts, even the negative ones, on like a biochemical level.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. This is so important.
Yes, this is why it's so freaking hard to change. And like, people forget this. You can actually get addicted to being stressed out, or you can get addicted to being angry, or addicted to being sad and depressed. And you're like, well, that's stupid. Why would I ever be addicted to being depressed? It is what's called chemical homeostasis. So your body has been in a state long enough that your cells think that's what's normal. And when it starts to change, your cells kind of freak out and they're like, wait, this isn't what we agreed on. Send that signal to the brain that brings it back to what we were doing. So all of a sudden it sends a signal to your brain asking for a certain chemical, which is about as complicated as your cells think. But then your brain starts thinking about all the stuff you're stressed out about to raise your cortisol or to give a dopamine hit. And people forget you can actually get addicted to problems because you get a dopamine hit when you solve that problem. So solving your problems is almost like cocaine. And so people forget that you will solve a problem and then all of a sudden you bring up the next one because you're waiting for that fix. It's like the fix itself is what you're seeking rather than the solution. And when we can start to bring awareness to that, you can catch yourself when you're in it. And it's nothing to necessarily like beat yourself up about. It's just something to be aware of so that when you're, you have a good day and then you find the next problem, you can be like, is this really like in my highest good right now? Or is my brain doing that thing? I think my brain's doing that thing. Let me get dopamine in another way. Let me go cold plunge, or let me go walk in the sun, or let me go for a jog or drink water or think about something I'm grateful for and see if I can just let this pass. But that whole like getting addicted to your own brain chemistry thing is a thing. And that's why when people start to meditate, especially if they haven't done it before, they hate it because it's basically your body fighting its own chemistry, and all the thoughts that you're stressed out about and everything that you're anxious about comes up in your brain because your brain is basically offloading. It's discharging. I think of meditation as a bodily function. Like we have to release waste from our bowel, we have to release waste from our bladder, and you have to relax consciously and have like a physical effect for that to happen. You have to do the same thing with your brain. You have to release toxic waste from your brain and allow your body to relax into a state where that can happen. And so meditation is just a time for that, but it means all the stuff that's on your mind is going to start coming up and your body's going to be trying to regulate your chemistry. And it is kind of willpower of being like, okay, I'm just going to sit here for 15 minutes, no matter what comes up, and I'm going to let my chemistry regulate. I've even done that thing where I'm meditating and I get up to go do something. And then I realized that I was in the middle of meditating. I'm like, no, go sit back down. I turn my body around. I go sit my butt back down. But like, I catch myself in the middle of it and it's hard. And it takes about 2 weeks to turn your chemistry over. So it's like 2 weeks of pushing through this kind of like funk until you really start to feel that shift. And that's where people tend to struggle. But if you can make it past that 2 week point of consistency, you will feel a chemical shift.
Yeah. This is a great, it's a very telltale thing too. And I've had a lot of experience with meditation now, and just getting people to understand there's really no such thing as like a good or a bad meditation. It's the way that we just get the sit in, and then things will start to change little by little. And there are plenty of times that I sit in front of my red light panel and have a meditation that doesn't feel like a meditation. It feels like a shopping list for my entire day ahead of me. And you still get the sit in. And there's times that you will have a beautiful notion. And pairing it with breath or pairing it with gratitude, again, is like, these are ways that I think that we can really shift the conversation that's happening inside the body. So if we're utilizing tools like that and we're utilizing, some of the other things that we may be given by a functional nutritionist and pieces of the puzzle, what are the other ways that we can, use subconscious reprogramming, or what are the other ways that we can, because I want to unpack just a little bit of sort of the reprogramming piece, right? It sounds, I think, to some people like drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Is this like, I have a mantra, or are you like programming my brain to think something different than I want to think, or like just the levels of control and how someone can work with a practitioner or work with their own mind, meditation being one example, to shift the conversation in the story, because this is pertinent, like for everyone listening, who this is pertinent to are people who are navigating loss and anxiety and depression and these other states that do have some connection with our body's chemistry. And many times, I know from even experience, we feel like I don't have control over this, and that there is some potential, every case is different, there is some truth to that. But I think far too often we're like, I don't know what to do. I don't have control. It's just happening to me, instead of really saying, how can I affect change at this neurochemical level?
Let me lay it out this way. So in my practice, I work with a triad of care for holistic care: the physical body, the chemical body, and the mental body. We were kind of talking about physical and chemical, right? Physical is like injuries and like traumatic effects from physical things. And then chemical is like if you're exposed to something environmentally or your diet, those kind of types of things. And then Mental is what you're doing with your thought processes. And that goes back to that person that came into the office, right? And they're so dissociated that we can't even do nutrition yet. This is the person that I start with subconscious care with. And we start and when we come to subconscious care, there's layers of the brain for us to work with, right? That first layer that I was talking about is the brainstem. Like, let's just get the body feeling safe so that we can even think in words. The next layer of the brain is the limbic brain. And this is like the emotional brain where we start to have our feelings. The third layer of the brain is the neocortex, or the thinking mind rather than the feeling mind. And the thinking mind is like the newest part of the mind. This is where we logic through everything. This is where like counseling and stuff works. So subconscious reprogramming, or I also affectionately call it like neural restructuring, because that's kind of what we're doing. We're like changing your neural pathways a little bit, is very much client led. And that's why I like it so much. And I also love it because we don't have to dive into the story. And man, I tell you, if there is one takeaway I wanted to share with you from the crazy health journey I went through and working through my own shadow work and trauma and stuff like that, it was this realization that healing has a lot less to do with figuring out the story and figuring out your trauma, and way more to do with remembering everything that your trauma made you forget, which is how to be joyful and how to be connected and how to be happy and how to feel those feelings in your body. And it's so much more important to put your attention there than it is to unwind your story, which is often very confusing. And over time, we lose our factualness and things like that. And that's, a lot of like Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. That's what he's training people to do. He's training people to rewire their brain in a positive orientation. And there's a variety of subconscious tools for this. I use one called Psych K, which is like psychological kinesiology. I use another one called neuro-emotional technique, another one called rapid rewire method, and then I also use neuro-linguistic programming. And I'll use them separately sometimes because they have different effects, or sometimes I'll kind of blend them together. But the beauty of it is we really don't need to go into the story. Like, I have counselors I refer to when people need to dive into story and like old stuff. But when we're working with something like NLP, it is very metaphorical. So I can talk to someone and I was actually just doing this with somebody yesterday, and I'll have them bring themselves to a place of like, okay, like, where do you feel safe? And she's like, oh, I'm on a dock from a lake by my childhood. And I was like, okay, great. That's perfect. And we were working with this part of her that was like very contracted. And I was like, well, this part of you that's feeling this way, like, if you ask it to show up, like, how does it show up? And she's like, well, it kind of shows up as this like, black shadow. And I was like, okay, all right. So, ask that shadow what it needs to feel safe. And then you start going down this path of like talking to this part of you as like a separate entity. And that's parts work. I think parts work is incredibly effective for complex PTSD, because that's what happens in complex PTSD is you like fraction into all these different little parts and kind of dissociate. And so when you talk to the part, you're able to find out what it needs. And it ended up being like her 8-year-old self. And she just like wanted to play. And so I was like, okay, great. Like, what do you want to do to play? She's like, I want to swim out to the buoy. I was like, okay, great. So we swam her out to the buoy, and we just allowed her this moment of playfulness in her mind with this younger version of herself. And then we came back to the deck and they were laying in the sun, and we got that younger self to agree to allow the adult self to handle the shadow work, and the younger self could just go play. And then we kind of worked with that part. Where I was working with somebody else and they had a problem with their boss. And I was like, oh, well, what does this feel like? What does this problem feel like? They're like, oh, it feels like I'm in a box. It's like, okay, great. Does the box have a ceiling? Does it have a floor? Are you on the grass? And they're like, I'm on the grass. Great. Can we dig out of the box? And so we like out of the box. And on the other side, we never talked about their boss, but all of a sudden the charge of the whole situation is gone because we metaphorically worked through it in their mind. So that's like NLP. It's kind of like hypnosis, but it's very client-led. Psych K uses neurological postures, which I really like. So you're actually using the body to imprint stuff into the mind, and it's all positively oriented. So the whole idea of Psych K is you're choosing how you want to feel. You're getting very specific with the wording on that. So instead of saying like, I don't want to feel fear, because the subconscious mind does not understand the negative, like don't, won't, can't, you say, I easily feel courage. And then we imprint that into the body through, like, I use muscle testing for this. And you literally ask the body questions of like, what part of the brain needs balancing? It's this part. Okay, great. Put your right hand on top of your left. And then we just ask the body questions until it gets stronger neurologically through muscle testing. And when it's strong to these statements, it now indicates that your subconscious mind is on board with that. And I love the muscle testing approach to some of the subconscious stuff because you can't lie to it. Because you can lie to yourself as much as you want. You can say that you believe this thing, but your body might not be in agreement with you. So the muscle testing is a way to find like, well, what do you think you believe? And what does your body believe? And when we can get the body and the mind on the same page, it just imprints differently. And the subconscious work is really subtle. Like sometimes you leave an appointment feeling like substantially better and profound. And sometimes you leave and you just feel calmer. But then over the next couple of weeks, you realize that that thing just like isn't bothering you anymore.
Yeah.
And then that starts to change the chemistry of your whole body.
And so much of this is interrelated with this, our nervous system feeling. It's a lot of conversation online about this now, like how we feel safe and all of that. And, you know, as a practitioner too, we just had a big retreat and had the conversation around like stop telling people that they're safe and start asking people if they feel safe, which is such an important piece because we hear this a lot in breathwork specifically where, and maybe sometimes ice, but like you are safe. It's like, great. Number one, I don't get to dictate that. Number two, if you had someone who was sort of crossing a line or a boundary in you, they probably were telling you the same thing, right? This is safe, this is fine, either energetically or verbally. And so just opening this conversation to say that a lot of this work and just really to get sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, or just the landscape is retraining the mind over and over again so that the nervous system can actually be like, okay, I'm actually fine. I'm actually not in danger. I might be in discomfort, but I'm not in danger, right? And so that there's that unwinding more and more and more in the system. So beautiful. Yeah, and a couple of those techniques are what you used with me when I was there, and I had some tears and I had some laughter and I felt like, oh, there's things that are changing and unwinding and also on many of the listeners and a lot of the females specifically I work with are go, 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 go. Jobs and kids and family and life and all the things are happening. And not to say that all humans aren't busy, but just really that nature of their current being very misaligned with being tapped into what a downregulated nervous system or a regulated nervous system feels like. So yeah, that work for me felt very profound. Should we talk a little bit about how these things and really can affect the inflammation in the body? I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, and looking at people's labs, I have a lot of people who show up with like inflammatory markers pretty high. And so you've talked a little bit about your specific personal story, and I know how many thousands of people you've seen. It's like, how often are things, you know, we can't get to the head of the snake. One of my mentors, Paul, would say, what's the head of the snake here? So how getting to the head of the snake could be what's happening in the tissues or the body or the brain versus just the nature of something that's happened. And of course, an acute injury may be different, but inflammation and how our bodies are working in space.
So inflammation's an interesting thing, right? Like we need it. It's important. It's how we build muscle. It's how we repair stuff. It's part of our cellular healing cycle. But I find what tends to happen is people just get stuck in that phase. And it's usually because, so the way that our cells heal, they look around to see if anything's wrong, and then they take out what's in the way, and then they put back in what we need, and then they test it out. And most of the time, like once we remove what's in the way, people feel better. And so they think that they're all healed. They think that they're done. And like when your sprained ankle feels better and you can like walk on it again without pain, it's still healing. You still got a couple weeks to go for that tissue to heal, even though you're not in pain. And so I find what happens with people is they get through this like excavation inflammation stage. They've removed the stuff that's irritating, and then the pain is mostly dissipated, but they don't allow themselves to put back in what they need to rebuild. And they don't allow their body time to like strengthen it and test it. So that's why they get stuck in this inflammation phase, is they never allow time for rebuilding because they only stop for like a fraction of the healing period. And for those people that you're talking about where it's go, 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 like I get it. I do. Like our world is insane. We are not supposed to be able to keep up with the society that we've created, but now we have to figure out ways to adapt. And I find biohacking kind of funny sometimes because it's literally just everything that nature gave us. It's like heat and cold and light and sleep. And that's biohacking. So now biohacking is essentially us just trying to create a natural environment again, like our ancestors had in order to adapt to the incredibly unnatural environment our society has created with fluorescent lighting and no sleep and going to bed at midnight and blue screens and dopamine stimulus until right before you go to bed, which, yes, anyone listening, your phone is basically cocaine. So if you're doing it before you go to bed, you're basically doing cocaine before you go to sleep. So it's the same dopamine pathway. And when we're doing that to ourselves all the time, it's like no wonder we're dysregulated, right? Our brain is living in that state where we're just like always on the go. And, if you have kids, like finding something you can do with your kids that regulates you too. Maybe it's like being in nature. Maybe it's doing some art. Maybe it's gardening. Like kids thrive when they have jobs, right? So it's like if you're doing house chores, like let them do house chores with you, even if they make one of them longer and more difficult. But like, I know what it's like to try to regulate your life while taking care of little humans, but you are the most important part of their life. You can't put them first. You must put yourself first. And I know that's probably a little bit of like an irritator for people to hear, but your whole goal is to serve your kid. And if you're completely depleted, you can't do that. And so you have to serve yourself first. You have to take care of yourself. And that comes back to,
And we say that all the time, right? But I think it really, to have that land to say, what's the way that I can serve myself with some self-care? It doesn't have to be a full spa day. It's just like, how can I get more rest? How can I have the discipline to turn off the phone or the television show or, be in more connection?
If you can start and end your day with a 15-minute walk without your phone, that is a great regulator. Like you can just start as simple as that. And then the other one that I find most people are depleted in, drink water. Everyone's dehydrated. Drink water. And please add like some sea salt to your water so your cells can actually absorb it. But people forget you can go into a fight or flight response from being dehydrated. And when you're chasing little people around all day, that can happen really easily.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit to detoxification because there is this notion that, and I was just having a client call this morning about, can I go vegetarian? Can I just do a green juice cleanse? Can I, what are all the ways that we can detox our body? And for many people, they try detox protocols, whatever they might be. I want to talk about a few ones that work and maybe myth bust some that don't. And just like, what are the key elements of like an effective, sustainable detox approach for the body? Because I want to shout out the fact that when I lived in LA specifically, people would be like, juice cleanse. And then like the juice, they're having 8 juices a day. And it's like apple and carrot and pineapple and like mixed with some green. But just this was a lot more of the sugar bomb vibes than anything else. So I'd love to hear your expertise on this.
Yes. Okay. So food is probably one of the most confusing things out there. However, when we're detoxing, I'm going to loop us right back into that holistic model where if your cells are all tense and tight, it doesn't matter how many detox supplements you take, they can't release the toxins and they can't absorb the nutrients. So first things first, get your nervous system regulated, start integrating like breath work and meditation into your life and moments where you feel calm. And it's not just this like one thing in the morning, it's like learning how to do that throughout the day on a regular basis. And, breath work isn't just this thing that you do for an hour. It's like the thing that you do at the stoplight after that jerk cuts you off to regulate your nervous system so that your whole system is calmer. If your kids are screaming in the back of the car, doing a little bit of breath work, they don't even have to know you're doing it. You're just like slow exhale through pursed lips, right? It just starts to slow your system down.
Yeah.
But this matters for detox. And I've learned this going through my own detox and now detoxing a bunch of people. Because one thing that happens as a practitioner is like after you go through some kind of health experience, like a detox, you then attract all of those clients because you know how to manage it. So I've had a lot of those clients and I've had people who are like allergic to magnesium, right? They're very sensitive. And if you're in that state, like your body is really backed up. And so this is what I teach people. Like first things first, you have to clear the streets. And so that comes back to the water. Like please drink water if you're trying to detox. Like you have to move it out of the system. And then the next thing is you have to kind of unclog the drain of the liver. And that's a much gentler process than people think. I use like glycine, taurine, and antioxidants. That's like one of the most effective things for phase 2. And the liver actually has to be unclogged backwards. So, there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of detox. Phase 3 is your bowel and like actually having a bowel movement. If you're constipated, it is not the time to detox. You have to figure out how to get pooping every day before you detox or you will make yourself sicker. And then phase 2 is the amino acids and antioxidants that I was talking about. And that's like unclogging the drain, letting things move out. And then phase 1 is converting and transforming toxic things so that they can move out. And that's like B vitamins and stuff, and glutathione and things like that. And glutathione kind of works in different phases of the liver, but you can take too much glutathione and you can back up your own systems because some people don't process sulfur well, and that's getting a little more biochemical. But a lot of these systems have to be working in harmony as a symphony. So there's something else called methylation, and that's like your ability to move molecules around and turn molecules into something else. And this has to do with your neurotransmitters too. So when your liver is backed up, your neurotransmitters tend to go kaput because you just don't have the resources because your liver's trying really hard to protect your body from toxins. The liver is the organ that needs a pay raise. It does like 10, 15 different things.
Yeah.
And it like manages, helps manage your blood sugar, helps detoxify things, produces your cholesterol, produces some of your hormones, like a whole bunch of stuff. So this safe detox has to be done in this order while the body is in a calm enough state that the cells can actually release the toxins, and preferably in a little bit of a parasympathetic state, which is the reverse of fight or flight, right? That's like our rest and digest, so that the body can enter repair mode. The detox is actually hard on the body. It's a stressor. So if you have a lot of other stressors going on, the last thing you want to do is add a toxic stressor. Mm-hmm. So preferably get yourself into a time where you're like, okay, I have a week where the projects at work are a little bit chill. You know, the kids are at their grandparents' and I can relax a little bit. That's a great time for a detox. And I know it's like the last time you want to do one because you just want to like have fun and do stuff, but that is the time when your body's actually ready for it. And there's, you know, different ways to push detox. And until you're pooping every day and you don't have crazy symptoms, that is the time when you can actually push stuff. But if you're not feeling good, that's the time where you really want to focus on drainage and stuff like lymph support and water and rest and just getting your body ready to be able to move stuff.
Yeah, just thinking about the I have a client who's like every year between Christmas and New Year's, it's the quiet time at the office, and like she has family, but not worried about, you know, I don't know, having a detox response or something like that. So she's just home. So it's like, well, this is the time that I'm going to spend detoxing. So it's like finding the right time for you, or just finding where there is the calmest space. And I think we underestimate the power of like stillness, meditation, breath work, and down regulation practices daily. And I'm so glad that you said this thing I want to reiterate, which is it doesn't have to be 60 minutes of breath work or you go to a full class and all the things, although that's nice. It can just be a few minutes and relatively subtle, right? It's like, as long as you're not the one who's speaking, you can do it in any sort of like office environment or meeting or on Zoom or any of that. So yeah, really important piece of that. And thanks for unpacking the detox thing. I think it's not something we have a conversation enough about, that there's these like, yeah, make sure the bowels are good, make sure antioxidants are coming next, like that second piece. And then getting to the place where maybe we're taking something that's a bit stronger, where that might be moving some of the things that are in our bloodstream and the things that are actually toxic to us, getting them out. Because quite often, do you have tests that you like? Like I'll have clients take like a stress test and heavy metal toxicity. And is there something that you're really like a super fan of when it comes to pulling and understanding what might be toxic to the body or what's showing up? Mold you talked about, which I think is a massive one that people don't always test for that. They test their homes, but they don't test their bodies.
Yeah. So toxicity is an interesting thing because you can run labs and you can have two people who both have the exact same levels of mold, and one person is miserable and feels like crap and one person is fine. And that just has to do with their detox genetics and how well they tolerate it. And
Yeah.
So for me, I am a functional practitioner. I like asking people, well, how do you feel? Right? And training them to ask themselves that. Because the other thing that I learned when I was going through my stuff, it doesn't always work to just be on a protocol of the same supplements forever and just expect that to be the answer. The body's way more dynamic than that. It changes and we need to change with it. So as I was going through that, I was adjusting my supplements all the time based on how I was feeling in the day. So that's a lot of what I teach people in my programs, because I think early on in my practitionerhood, I just got over wanting to like save people, and I desperately want to teach people how to save themselves and teach them, because people forget that doctor means teacher. And so I want to teach people how their body works, because you have a body, you should know how it works. I don't know why it's not included more in our school system. And like we all learned about the Krebs cycle and cellular energy in like high school biology. I use that every single day. It's how I heal your system. And if I can teach you how that system works, you can check in with yourself and be like, I feel kind of gunky today and a little bit groggy, and I've been taking a lot of glutathione. Maybe I'll just skip that one today and drink water. And just teaching people how to check in with that. I saw this reel recently and made me laugh. And it was like, humans keep using all these like biometric tracking devices and stuff. It's basically just an expensive Tamagotchi, except the animal you're trying to keep alive is yourself. I was like, this is true. And that just made me chuckle, because really it's like we've become so disconnected from our bodies that we can't even tell when we're hungry. We need like an alarm to tell us to eat. And so I'd rather teach people and be like, hey, check in with yourself. Are you hungry right now? They're like, I am hungry, but it's this weird like gnawing feeling that's really intense, rather than like that empty ache I get when I'm hungry. So this gnawing feeling with like a lot of pressure, I think this is actually a sugar surge. I think I'm having a sugar craving, and teaching people to realize the difference between those things so that you can be like, oh, I'm having a sugar surge right now, so this is actually a good time for me to have carbs. But then when I wake up in the morning and I have that deep, empty ache, I don't want carbs. I want protein. And teaching people how to do that. Because if we can do that, then that's like sustainability for health. I had a client who was post chemo, and he's just feeling terrible. And his doctors were like, oh, this is, sorry, these are the effects, like, good luck. And he had like migraines and like skin rashes and all this stuff. And he did my course at home before we even worked together, and got rid of his skin rashes and lost 10 pounds. And then I like sent him to a chiropractor for his headaches that he was told would never go away. And they were gone in like 2 weeks. And that was just him by himself. And then he did a couple more of my programs, and now he's like studying tantra and like energetic stuff in his midlife. And like, it's awesome. It was a whole transformation for him, and just this opening of like what was possible. Because my theory is my approach is your body is designed to heal. It is. And I look at everything that's right with it, and then we bring it out. And you asked me about labs. So I can run toxin screens, and I can learn what's in the body, and it's incredibly helpful, and it's a great double check, and it's a way for me to know exactly what we're working on and get really specific with my binders. Or if I run a gut test, if I'm suspicious of someone's gut, like, I want to know what infections are present, and like, did the parasite we were working on go away? Like, that's important to know. However, to me, it all comes out the same way. So is your gut working? Is your liver working? Do you have the building blocks that you need to run those things? And so there's another lab I like if someone's like short on money, right? Because the detox labs and the gut labs are a little expensive.
Yeah.
So there's one I like called like the Nutri-Eval, or there's an equivalent called the Ion, and it's basically like a big nutrient overview. There's one called like the Nutristat as well. And all of these kind of let me know like, what's your cellular chemistry doing? How's your mitochondria functioning? How are your detox pathways functioning? Is there anything going on in your gut that I should be kind of worried about? And it gives me an inkling, right? It's just like, there's dysbiosis. It just doesn't tell me exactly what's there. And that's what the gut test is for. It's like, well, what kind of parasite is there? But this one, it gives me a big overview of the body, lets me know what your fats are doing, lets me know what your amino acids are doing, your overall vitamins, all of the pieces that you need to run the machinery to get the stuff out anyway. That's what that lab is for.
And you said it's called Nutri-Eval. Is one of the ones that
the Nutri-Eval is the one I like to use. The Ion panel is like a more detailed version of it that gives more enzymatic processes. The Nutristat is like the Nutri-Eval with a blood lab included, so it checks your homocysteine and your thyroid and all that stuff. I usually combine like a functional blood lab with the Nutri-Eval, and I'll check the liver and check the blood cells and check how your cardiovascular system is doing alongside these nutrient panels. But the nutrient panel I love because no matter what your genetics are, no matter what your toxin is, no matter what your infection is, I still have to know that stuff to support your body to get it out. And to me, I'm like, well, let's figure out how to get your detox pathways running and give your body what it's missing so that you can start to regulate a little bit. And then we can rotate binders and antimicrobials to get stuff out anyway, which is what we'd be doing. But the other labs, if you do have some weird gut infection, it's nice because they will culture it, which means that they'll grow it in a petri dish, and then they'll test what it's sensitive to, and they'll be like, oh, this one's sensitive to oregano, or this one's sensitive to uva ursi. And I'm like, great, let's use those as our priority. So it lets me get very specific with antimicrobials. But for people that don't have the money on labs, like most of the time you can work through the system fairly naturally. And that's where the muscle testing's awesome, because it's like a lab in office and just one other tool to use. And then if people come into the office, I'll muscle test them. We'll figure out what's going on in the system. And then that will determine what lab we want to run. And so there's a lot of cool ways to work with it. But if I only have one thing to run, of course, my answer is it always depends. It depends on someone's history. But most of the time, if I only have one thing to run, that nutrient panel is going to give me the biggest overview and give me the most actionable steps. Because like I said, I like actionable things. So I can look at the toxins and I can be like, great, all these are present. What are we going to do? And that's the other lab. So I like the actionable lab.
Yeah, and then you also made this correlation to like what's going on in the gut is quite often what's going on in the brain, right? So there's a correlation to that to say, oh, what things could be dysfunctional. And I like with the muscle testing piece, it's so interesting for me because I would say 15 years ago or so, one of my girlfriends was doing muscle testing and things like this, and I hadn't heard much about it, and I was like, come on, this isn't going to be the thing. But like time and time again, and I've seen enough and worked with enough practitioners, and I imagine with obviously because you're using this work and also you've had thousands of patients that you've used it on, it's like time and time again that there's like confirmation, even when you're doing the labs around the stuff that's coming up in muscle testing, which for me is just like fascinating energetics. And I think I've really done in the beginning, I was just like, this feels very woo, right? Like, how is this going to be possible that my body is going to talk and respond? And now I would have a little bit better understanding that the nervous system is happening. The nervous system is doing things that like every 200 millisecond, the nervous system is checking in on environment and doing all the things that we don't even, before even thoughts are formed, right? That our thoughts are an aggregation, our feelings, let's say our emotions are an aggregation of 50 to 100 of those 200 millisecond check-ins, right? And they're all moving so rapidly so that there is that connection there. And so, yeah, I just want to shout that out because I think that there are sometimes people who are like, this muscle testing thing, I don't understand it. And working with a solid practitioner who really does can make all the difference, of course. And then also a practitioner who I think is like you, who has a sensitivity to the responses the body is giving, and I'm sure that comes with time, with people who are first starting out with this. But the muscle testing piece has always been fascinating to me, because it's the thing that I knew the least about outside of the world of like nervous system tone. And then the thing that I've consistently seen that I'm like, well, I'm going to take all the labs and do all the things anyway. And it sort of like ends up with a parallel universe to what came out in the beginning. And also you did a little of that with me when I was in there, and I was like, she knows my whole life story. What's happening?
It is so funny how it works. And for anyone who this is new for, muscle testing is just a neurological test. You're testing the nervous system and asking it questions. And there's a lot of different ways to use it. There's like direct wiring tests, which is almost like flipping a circuit breaker in the body. Like if I lift someone's arm, which is a C5 nerve root, and then I ask them to turn their head and all of a sudden their arm can't hold strength anymore, I know that the C5 segment in their neck, when they turn their head that direction, is compromising that nerve root. Every single doctor learns that test. We have to know it for boards. Like it's part of your exam. So every doctor knows how to do that. It's just whether or not they're actually applying it. And then you can get to the more like subjective muscle testing, which is like the Psych K stuff and like the brain stuff, right? But just like your body and your muscles know that you're stressed out when you compress a nerve, your body knows that you're stressed out when you're thinking about that, traumatizing thought that we're trying to clear. And so the muscle is going to respond in the same way. And then when you're doing it with nutrients, or like I have vials in office that have been homeopathically imprinted with the resonance and frequency of different enzymes in the body, it's basically frequency medicine. You're holding that frequency up to the body and you're asking the body like, hey, does this frequency stress you out? And the muscle will stay strong of like, no, the presence of that actually helps me. Or the muscle will go weak if the body's like, yes, I don't like that in my presence. It stresses out the whole system. So it's like a very simple way to state it. But then it's cool because you can work with supplements and like see if someone responds well to the supplement before they take it based on the exchange of frequency with that supplement. And yeah, it probably lands more on like the slightly woo-woo side of the spectrum, but gosh, I wish hospitals implemented it. Like I really, really wish they did. I've seen, like I just had a guy in the other day who's been going through like 3 or 4 years of like crazy medical care stuff because he's had, some nervous system twitches ever since living in like a building that got condemned for mold. And it was the first appointment we had, and I just like ran through my vials and I was like, okay, this is what's showing up. This is what's showing up. He's like, that's literally what was on all my labs. And I haven't told you about it. And I was like, great, at least we're accurate. So to me, it's just this extra tool, but it's really cool because, like going back to when we were talking about like inflammation, you can figure out the source of the inflammation because inflammation is a very broad term. And so then the question is, well, where is it coming from? And like if someone has high cholesterol, that's like a big red flag in the body to me, right? That's the fire department. That's your body calling the fire department to repair stuff. Your cholesterol is your fire department that fixes things. So if you have high cholesterol, just getting someone's cholesterol lower is like firing the fire department and not looking for the fire. And so for me, if it's high, I'm like, okay, well, where is this coming from? Like, what are you trying to repair? And there's ways that you can track that down with different lab tests, like isoenzymes and different stuff, which is a way to see like what tissue damage is happening. But if we can start to even use muscle testing to be like, oh, the inflammation's coming from over here, it's coming from this organ, or oh, it's coming from this pathway, and it's actually that you're not processing your B vitamins right, so therefore your liver actually can't get rid of anything because you can't absorb this, then we like really know where to work and we know where to focus. And you can do that with labs or you can do that with muscle testing, but I view it as labs are us translating the body's language into English. Mm-hmm. Muscle testing is us translating English into the body's language. And so I like muscle testing because the person actually gets to participate in their care rather than just having stuff done to them based on the blood draw that was at one specific time of day.
Yeah, which can also feel confusing and daunting. I just sent a small smattering of the responses of the blood test with some basic notes to a client. And she was like, this feels overwhelming. This feels like everything's wrong with me. This feels like, and it's like I learned time and time again, even though I like scrape it down to just a few of the key highlights of things that are going on and say, look, this isn't saying that you have some chronic dis-ease in this moment, but and we're working on navigating this now so that that doesn't arise in the body. And so, and I always do it with the help of people like you because I don't always, the correlations are the hardest things to connect the dots on when it comes to labs. And even though I've studied some of those things and gone to lots of seminars about what the correlations are from, certain parts, but the extensive lab review as like really requires not just a working knowledge, but repeated use of that knowledge so that you're like seeing lots of different cases and patients and creating correlations that aren't just in the blood work, but this type of person keeps showing up with this type of issue. And I think that that's like forever the value that anyone who's doing functional work like you are is bringing to the table. Can we talk a little bit about injury prevention?
Yes.
I work with a lot of athletes, and I think there's some people that, navigating injury and overdoing it and maladaptive training and then, of course, acute injury and things that are happening in their own system. What are your past experiences? I mean, you were involved heavily in sports and whatnot. Like, what are your past experiences sort of dictated from an injury prevention standpoint for prepping the body so that these things, as avoidable, can go as smoothly as possible?
Yes. So I'm going to remind people of that allostatic load concept that we were talking about at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Injury, depending on how severe it is, takes up some of your capacity. And then whatever you have left is whatever you have left. But people forget that when you get injured, your body goes into an inflammatory state. This is how you heal the injury. Think of your ankle swelling up when you twist it. However, that swelling is body-wide. So even though it's in your ankle, that tissue change is also even happening in your gut. So you get leaky gut for a little bit when you get injured. So when you're injured, it's even more important to be on top of your food, even though I know you're craving like sugar and carbs and all the things. It's because your body wants quick energy, which like, yes, you can do some, but try to be on the healthier side, preferably orient more paleo. Your body will thank you. You need protein in order to heal that injury. So when we were talking about diets and stuff, and you're asking about that, one of the things that I'll see is if I have vegans that have come in and they've been through like mold or their body, like if they're coming in, they're usually sick and dealing with something, right? Your body doesn't have the digestive fire to process that much plant debris and turn it into nutrients when your resources are being allocated towards an injury. So when you're injured, it's actually ideal for you to have easily accessible protein. And that generally comes in the form of animal protein. So even if you're vegan, like consider dairy when you're injured, but sometimes dairy can be inflammatory for people. So I find things like straight animal protein, like beef, are pretty well tolerated, or chicken, things like that. And so you can kind of think of going to like chicken soups and bone broth and, steak and crucifers when you're sick or when you're injured, and that's going to help rebuild those things. And then that injury, it creates an inflammatory process in the body. This is also why you get depressed when you're injured and you lose motivation is because all your dopamine is going towards your inflammation pathway and it's not in your brain. And dopamine is our like go get 'em chemical. And so if that's all going to inflammation, you just kind of want to sit on the couch. And that's okay. Your body's in a healing state. And so you just allow yourself to do that without beating yourself up. Because if you like sit on the couch and feel shame, or you eat the cookie and you feel shame, you're going to metabolize it differently. And so like if you're in that state, and I'm not giving you permission to just like sit on the couch and eat cookies when you're injured, right? We're still talking about like eating a healthy diet, but just don't beat yourself up during that time and try to stay positive and try to believe in your body's ability to heal and focus your attention on what you want to heal. There's this old saying of where attention goes, energy flows and blood follows. So like if you want to heal something, focus on that thing and imagine what you want your cells to do. And in your head, as a picture, tell your body what you want it to do. And that's what I was doing when I was going through my health stuff, is I was imagining like my skin feeling incredibly like with a lot of integrity, right? And like this ability to like love and touch my skin again, like, oh, what a beautiful organ that is. Or like I was dealing with a knee injury and I had taken out some bone and cartilage out of my knee. And I was looking up videos of how bone and cartilage heal. And then I was meditating and imagining that happening exactly in my knee where it needed to happen. And then I would like see myself doing sports or snowboarding and like feeling the absorption of like landing in my legs and like feeling that muscle pressure. And that feeling is how you instruct your body. Your body learns from feelings. It doesn't really learn from thoughts. It learns from like the feeling of how good it would feel to do that without pain, and then the gratitude that comes from that. And then that's your body being like, oh, okay, I got it now. Now I know what I'm supposed to do. So if we can direct our bodies in that way when we're injured and understand that we have a lesser capacity for emotional stuff and crappy food when we're injured, and just focus on nurturing those things, that is going to be how we come out on the other side of the injury the best that we can. And going through an injury is crazy. And like, especially depending on how severe it is, like for me, I couldn't walk for a while and I couldn't go down the stairs for a year. I lost all my sports. And like, to me, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a chiropractor. Like my whole life is based in movement. So it was like a whole identity crisis. And people don't really talk about the identity crisis. And I even talk about this with pro athletes, right? Where it's like their whole life is that. And then they get injured. It affects their career. It affects their safety, their
relationships, mindset, everything, every piece of them, right? Because they've defined themselves by that piece. I also find that like when I'm working with people who have either low level or some other kind of autoimmune condition or something that's teetering, let's just say, in their body, that when these injuries happen, then all the other things come. Like there'll be a little cascade of a few things popping off.
Yes.
And well, like, and why is it all happening now at once, you know?
It is funny how when it rains, it pours, but then I mean, if we were to tickle the quantum a little bit, when our brain goes into a stressed out state, because your dopamine is going towards your injury and all this stuff, and then your mood kind of comes down, your frequency changes, and then what you're calling into your life changes, and then all of a sudden these other things start showing up, or like your focus and your perception is different on those things. And then you mentioned autoimmune, and I wanted to mention this earlier, so I think this will be a nice way to kind of tie in everything that we're talking about with the mind. So Gabor Mate, who's like the father of trauma, has studied a lot of autoimmune stuff. And he was basically saying the people most likely to get autoimmune are those who do what they do not wish to do. So basically those who quiet their voice. And there's this component of like being injured and fighting it the whole time, and also accepting it. And just letting your body go into a state where you're healing and you're just working with it. And if you go into that state of acceptance, you're probably going to have less issues with autoimmune than if you're fighting it the whole time.
Yeah, and I think that would include too, like I am working with an Olympic skater now and who's had a multitude of coaches in the past, not now, she's a different set of coaches, and including me, but where there was just like, push through the injury, push through, keep going, doesn't matter. And all of that is just compounding every other issue in the system.
100%. Yes. And if you have any kind of chemical stuff going on, that pushing through, like you only get one body. And if you start to look at the cost of like knee replacements and stuff, your knee's worth like 60 grand. So like, it's great to maintain that part of you. And, you know, I think this happens like as you get older and stuff too, like you just realize that your body doesn't have the ability to push through like that. Or if you go through some health thing, like I was talking about earlier, like that was the universe humbling the heck out of me. I got very humbled during that time and made a totally different relationship with my body, where I realized just how much I've been pushing through it my entire life. And I think back to the days of my teens when I like snowboarded all day with no water and like barely any food and thought that was okay. And so it's like now I like to teach people this sustainability, just like you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so incredible. Is there anything we want to tap in? We've had a couple conversations about quantum on the show, and I just want to know if there's anything we want to tap in before we close out on this. Talking about frequency specifically, and more and more, I think it's becoming common vernacular, but just understanding that there are things that we don't even know that we know. And then there are things that we do know, like you can look up a healthy liver has a specific frequency you can kind of look up online even, right? And like there is some notion there. So just maybe catalyzing the two components of this term frequency that you've used a few times for the listeners.
Okay. So I love working with skeptics, right? We've been talking about a few woo-woo things of like muscle testing and all this stuff. So let's dive right into the science. There are many research articles showing that our brain basically works in 11 dimensions. Your brain is a quantum computer. Your body is a quantum computer. This has been proven by science, and we're still coming to understand it. Like, we do not fully understand the body at all. There are theories of how our proteins basically work through what's called quantum tunneling, which is why you can have an immediate response in the body when you put something on the tongue and like the whole system changes. It's this idea that the proteins can like move through space and time, right? And they can immediately respond. There's theories that the microtubules of your brain have quantum processes. Microtubules are like the structure of your neurons. And if they have quantum processes, that means that like your thoughts and your projections have quantum processes. And when you think about the fact that they can measure your brainwaves with a magnet that doesn't touch your head, that means that you're emitting your own biofield, you're emitting your own Wi-Fi. Your thoughts exist outside your body, and they're measuring it with a magnet. So that is basically frequency, right? They're measuring frequency. They're measuring an energetic presence. That's really what frequency is. If you go into like the physics of it, it has to do with like how electrons are vibrating in their valence shells. And, you know, that's all going back into chemistry and stuff for people. But it's this idea that we emit our own Wi-Fi. And so if we simplify it, it's like, well, what channel are you tuned to? Are you tuned to FM, where you're like grumpy and moody and focused on your past traumas and like worrying if your injury is going to heal? Or are you turned to AM, where you're focusing on your gratitude and your joy and you're amazed at your body's ability to heal and you're really looking forward to like running that race in spring once this injury is over? And it's where you're kind of tuning that Wi-Fi in your system. And that's the frequency that we're talking about, like lower frequency, like guilt, shame, sadness, lower emotions, and higher frequency, like peace, love, acceptance, all of that. So if we spend our time focusing our emotions on those things, our emotions are one of the greatest things we have as our frequency producer. And so if we're focusing on gratitude and acceptance and love and those things, it's going to immediately raise the frequency of the rest of our body, even if you're not focusing on that thing. And, you know, like Dr. Joe Dispenza will start a lot of his workshops with just chakra meditations. So you're just moving through the energy centers of the body and you're focusing on them and you're giving them energy. So you're basically giving energy to your neural ganglia, or your conglomerations of neurons that produce hormones and chemistry and things like that. You're paying attention to them, you're giving them energy, and you're balancing them. And just from doing that, the rest of your system balances. And when we start practicing this and you get your system balanced, then you can start focusing on cool things that you want. Like, I am so grateful for this trip to Italy I get to take next summer, and that somehow the money is just going to work out because I'm going to have a job land in my lap. And like, that's how people manifest that stuff. That's the idea of manifestation. But it's this,
but it's
like,
not just dreaming about it, but just energetically coding yourself with like the way that you feel and think.
100%. Yep. You're basically coding the matrix with your frequency.
Yeah. And thanks for like opening that too with the, you know, it's not often enough that people are like looking into what the real foundational elements are. And we understand at this point, we have everyone always says a 4-foot radius, and like our cells are batteries at the very base level. And like, these things are all very well documented. And I don't think there's any one of us that's like, well, we figured it all out, the whole body, how it works. There's so much that we continue to expound and expand upon in understanding of our own systems. So I think more and more, it's why I've been having more conversations around that. It's why I'm like bringing tools in that are definitely different than the norm. And it's why we get to, what I love about you is that you have such a deep understanding of this space, as well as really all the practical and applicable information from going through med school, being a chiro, and all of the, I mean, you have the certifications on your wall behind you, which I think is amazing. But also the reason it's great for me to say, if you're not watching this and you're just listening, you are a continuous learner. You're always curious. You always show up in my field and in my frame of my life as one of the smarter peoples when it comes to the whole body healthy concept. And every time I think you find an area where you're like, how does that plug in? I have a little gap there. You go and you find the information and you go deep on it, girl. You get all in, and then you're like, okay, great. Now I have this puzzle piece. And it's why it's so important that people are choosing the right programs, the right coaches, the right practitioners to work with, because this is another relationship of someone you can build trust with and someone that can give you direction that sets you on the path forward, right? So it's like this trusted. We can't get all the information that you have gathered over the many, many years of working in this field, that we can't get that in one fire hose moment, right? So we have to work with people like you, and we have to get into programs like yours and to be able to get that.
Well, and I love having my fellow practitioners who I can collaborate with, right? Like, I'm not going to teach people how to cold plunge. I'm going to send them to your program. And I love all the stuff that I've studied. And I never expected to get certified in subconscious modalities, but it just like fell in my lap. And then I started using it and it worked really well.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just kind of been that exploration of stuff. And I have people give me a hard time. They're like, you're a chiropractor. Like, why do you do functional medicine and this stuff? I was like, I don't know. I just picked the degree that let me study all the things that I wanted to study and gave me freedom in my career. And to me, chiropractic studies the vitalistic model. So that's how I wanted to be trained, how to learn about the body is let me bring out everything that's right with you, instead of the medical model, which is let me find everything that's wrong with you and suppress it. And so I just wanted to be trained in that model. But if you're looking for a practitioner, the type of degree doesn't matter as much as their continuing education. And like I ran out of space on my wall for the degrees that I have, right? But a lot of them I didn't get continuing education for. I did them because they were interesting. So look for practitioners like yourself that like to learn and like to expand. And like, if you're going in for functional medicine and your intake form isn't a long intake form with a lot of questions, you might want to see how many questions that practitioner asks you, because the quality of your questions is the quality of your answers as a practitioner. So I ask people tons of questions when they come in, because that's why I don't always need labs. Like, if you take a really good history, you can usually figure out what's going on for the most part. And so just find curious practitioners when you're looking for them. Curiosity is key.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to end with the question that I always ask at the end of the podcast, and then I want to make sure that we can tell everybody where all of your programs are in the interwebs. And also, of course, people can come work one-on-one with you. But as you've already mentioned, there are so many early tools for people to come and work online and learn from you in a way that can change the game for them. So I like to ask every guest, what if they could go back to speak to, let's say, your 16-year-old self, and share, you're like, oh, that was a year, and share a message that you have sort of from the future version of Dr. Christine. What would you tell your 16-year-old self that would be a pivotal point in navigating the very best version of their wellness overall?
Fix your gut. You don't need drugs. And because I went through what a lot of 16-year-old girls go through, which is like, you're a little bit moody, and then you get put on birth control, and then you get depressed, and then they put you on antidepressants, and then you get depressed and fat, and then like your whole chemistry is dysregulated and no one's checking on you, and it's been like 4 years. So versus just being like, hey, you should probably stop eating bagels and nacho cheese and Dr. Pepper. And like, if I had done that, I probably would have regulated just fine. So my main message is health is way simpler than you think. And the most important thing that you can do is regulate your daily rhythm and integrate the mindfulness stuff that we were talking about, so that your state exists for the majority of the time in the same state our ancestors would have existed, which is like sitting by the river, eating your catch, and hanging out with your tribe. Like, if you can get your body to mostly live in that state, even if you have a busy life, right? Like, you're stuck in traffic, taking your kids to daycare and all of the things, like, you're stuck in traffic, do breath work. It's a great time to do breath work. It's just like allowing yourself to find those moments in your life where you can better regulate yourself, and then like eating real foods, drinking real water, not just like sparkling water, right? Drink real water, and sleeping. and getting sunlight and breathing. Those are probably the most important things you can do for your health. And then we can add in the other stuff. But first and foremost, regulating your rhythm.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how much you spoke about just gratitude in general, just having that space of being thankful for the things that you have and that, our eyes can reflect with the light and take in pictures and see what's happening and really feel
Practice
into
I'm
that.
working on every day still.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Oh, it's so beautiful to have you here. Will you talk just briefly about your programs that you have so people know where they can come and check them out? And
Yeah. So I started making these because I was able to teach people more than I could teach them in office. And a lot of people can fix stuff at home by themselves if they just understand how their body works. So I just put one out the other month called Align Mastering Your Signals. And it's all about the mindset stuff that we were talking about. It goes through the 3 layers of the brain and like a little mini course challenge of like balancing your brain in 3 days. And then it goes through the power of intention, understanding the quantum brain, and then like all the grounding techniques for your nervous system. And every single module has meditations that go with it. So even in one of those, I take you through what's called like a quantum timeline meditation, which is an NLP technique for like removing stress from the past and inserting what you want into the future in your timeline. So that's a very cool one. And any of these you can find at my website. It's just depth, DEPTH, like you have depth, depthwellness.com. And then you can find it in the masterclass library. And then I also have a foundational course. The client that I talked about who is post chemo that went through this and fixed a bunch of stuff. It's a 5-week course, but it's meant to take you through understanding your food reactions and like how your body responds to stuff and when to reach for something and when to not, and like how to really cleanse your gut at home. And there's meditations for each step of that as well. And then for the lab stuff, I even have a little masterclass around labs because I was talking to people online and they were confused. I was like, I'm just going to do a class on this. So I call it my basics class, but it is a little bit more of an advanced class, but it's still great to know. But I also go through the organ systems and how I view how they interact, like that thriving city I was talking about. And I think it's a different perspective than people have seen. Like people forget that your bones and your lungs are part of your immune system. Right. It's just not usually what we think of. And so I take people through that. And then I take them through like the core labs that we were talking about and like what's out there. And then how like different markers can pertain to different symptoms, even the same marker. So just giving people like a little bit of that foundational understanding. And that's in that same masterclass library area. So feel free to explore at depthwellness.com. Or you're always welcome to follow me on social media for free content. And that's just Dr. Christine Smith, all one word, no punctuation. And you can find me on Instagram or Facebook, and then on YouTube under Depth Wellness. And there's tons and tons of talks, including our previous talk on there as well, about like managing cold plunge for women and all that stuff, which I love that one. I share it with a bunch of people. So tons of resources for people wherever you're at. And my goal is just for you to feel empowered and healthy in your life.
yeah, and I will say that all of your the content that you put out is just fire. It's so good. Just I think first and foremost, I was like on Instagram, and then it just lets you down the rabbit hole of all this other information. You take such care with the way that you share the information, and there's just always such a passion behind everything you're sharing in the moment. So lots of areas for people to pull content to get to know you better. And then also, yeah, highly recommend getting into any of this coursework because advocating for your own body and having a little bit more information and understanding for whatever medical room you're walking into so that you can really advocate for yourself is so important.
I'm going to tell you, you're smarter than you think. No one knows your body better than you, and no one's going to save you in your health except you.
Yeah, beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know we both have to run, but it's been such a pleasure and more to come for us. And we'll put everything in the show notes.
Thank you. Always love chatting.
Yeah, beautiful.